The applause died before the truth was even spoken. One heartbeat earlier, the grand ballroom of the Las Vegas Charity Gala had been glowing beneath towering crystal chandeliers, filled with laughter, expensive perfume, polished tuxedos, glittering gowns, and the unmistakable confidence of people who believed they had already witnessed every miracle money could buy. Then, a single voice shattered everything. "Stop! That man is no hero!" The words ripped through the room like thunder splitting an open sky. Every head turned. Every camera swung away from the dazzling stage. Every smile disappeared. Standing near the very last row was an elderly man with snow-white hair, his thin hands gripping an old wooden cane as though it were the only thing keeping decades of grief from collapsing onto the floor. His weathered face trembled, not from fear, but from memories that had waited far too long to be heard. At the center of the stage, Elvis Presley stood perfectly still. His fingers rested above the polished ivory keys of the grand piano, without touching them. The first note never came. The silence became heavier than the applause that had filled the room only moments before. Television lights illuminated Elvis's famous white suit embroidered with gold. Diamonds sewn into the fabric reflected thousands of tiny stars across the ballroom ceiling. Normally, he would smile. Normally, he would joke with the audience. Normally, he would begin singing before anyone even realized they had been holding their breath. Tonight, he simply stared. The old man took one slow step, then another. His cane echoed across the marble floor. Click, click, click. Each sound felt louder than the orchestra waiting beside the stage. The audience watched without breathing. Photographers leaned forward. Journalists uncapped their pens. Someone whispered that perhaps this was another publicity stunt. Someone else quietly answered, "No, look at Elvis." They did, and for the first time in years, the king looked uncertain. The old man finally reached the piano. Without saying another word, he reached inside the worn pocket of his faded coat. The room collectively inhaled. From the pocket emerged something impossibly small. Not money, not a weapon, not a document. A photograph. Its edges had turned yellow with age. Tiny cracks crossed its surface like rivers carved by time. The old man carefully placed it on top of the grand piano. He didn't slide it toward Elvis. He simply laid it there, as though placing a memory onto an altar. Elvis lowered his eyes. The instant he saw the photograph, every drop of color vanished from his face. His lips parted. His breathing stopped. His hands began to tremble. Not dramatically, not for the cameras, almost invisibly. The kind of trembling that comes when a person realizes the past has finally found them. The audience couldn't see the picture clearly. They rose from their seats, trying to catch a glimpse. The nearest photographers zoomed their lenses. One finally gasped, "My God!" The whisper spread from table to table faster than fire. "It's him! And a little girl!" People stretched higher. More cameras zoomed closer. The image slowly appeared on the giant projection screens surrounding the ballroom. A young Elvis, far younger than anyone had expected. Beside him, a little girl no older than 6. Her dress was dirty, her cheeks were stained with tears. She clung to Elvis's arm as though he were the only safe place left in the world. No one understood. Why had this picture been hidden? Who was the child? Why had Elvis never spoken about her? Then the old man looked directly into the cameras. I have spent many years searching for this man. The ballroom became completely silent. I searched through every city, every concert, every newspaper. I waited outside hotels. I wrote letters that were never answered. I even prayed that God would allow me to meet him just once before I died. He paused, his eyes filled with tears. And tonight, I finally found him. A reporter stood. Sir, are you accusing Elvis Presley of something? The old man slowly turned toward him. His answer came without hesitation. Yes. Gasps filled the ballroom. I accuse him of carrying a secret that should have belonged to the entire world. Confused murmurs erupted instantly. Some believed he was exposing a crime. Others believed he was about to reveal a scandal. Several guests quietly shook their heads. One famous television host whispered to the producer beside him, "This could destroy his career." The producer nodded. Keep every camera rolling. Another journalist leaned toward his colleague. If this is real, this will be tomorrow's front page. Across the ballroom, people who had admired Elvis for years suddenly looked at him differently. Questions replaced admiration. Suspicion replaced celebration. No one noticed that Elvis had never once tried to interrupt the old man. Not once. Instead, he kept staring at the photograph, almost as though it had become more alive than everyone standing around him. The old man pointed toward Elvis. Tell them. Elvis remained silent. Tell them who she was. Nothing. Tell them why she disappeared. Still nothing. The audience began whispering louder. Someone shouted from the back, "If you're innocent, say something!" Another voice joined. "What are you hiding?" Within seconds, the ballroom transformed into a courtroom. No judge, no jury. Only thousands of eyes demanding answers. Elvis slowly reached for the photograph. His fingertips barely touched its corner. The paper felt fragile enough to crumble. He lifted it carefully. For a long moment, he simply looked. His reflection shimmered across tears gathering inside his eyes. He wasn't seeing an old picture anymore. He was somewhere else. Somewhere far beyond the chandeliers, far beyond the cameras, far beyond Las Vegas. He was staring into a night that had never truly ended. A memory. A road. Rain. Broken glass. Screaming. Blood. A frightened little girl. His breathing became uneven. The orchestra members exchanged nervous glances. Even they sensed something had changed. The old man quietly watched Elvis, not with hatred, not with anger, with sadness, as though he had already forgiven him many years ago. The audience misunderstood that look. They mistook silence for guilt. One woman stood. "If you have nothing to hide, then explain the picture." Others nodded. The whispers became louder. A few people even began leaving their tables, convinced they were witnessing the downfall of America's greatest entertainer. Near the front row, a young photographer lowered his camera. He looked at Elvis's face. Something didn't fit. Guilty people often became defensive. They argued, they shouted, they denied everything. Elvis did none of those things. Instead, he looked like a man reliving the worst night of his entire life. The photographer quietly whispered to himself, "That's not fear. That's heartbreak." No one heard him. The old man reached into his coat once more. This time, the room held its breath even longer. He removed a tiny hospital wristband. Its faded white plastic had become almost gray with age. The ink was barely visible anymore. Yet one name could still be read. A little girl's name. The same girl from the photograph. The old man gently placed the wristband beside the picture. Then, from another pocket, he produced a sealed envelope. Its paper had yellowed, the edges were worn, the stamp had nearly disappeared. Across the front, written in delicate handwriting, were only 3 words. For Elvis Presley. A ripple of shock swept through the ballroom. The envelope had never been opened, not once. Not in all those years. The old man lifted it carefully. I promised that only he would read these words. He extended the letter toward Elvis. The king stared at it without moving. His hand hovered in the air, just inches away. Yet it felt like crossing 20 years instead of a few inches. Finally, he accepted it. His fingers shook so violently that the envelope nearly slipped to the floor. The audience leaned forward together. No one blinked, no one coughed. Even the photographers forgot to press their shutters. The entire ballroom waited for one man to open one letter that had remained silent for almost 2 decades. Elvis slowly broke the brittle seal. He unfolded the paper with extraordinary care. The room became so quiet that the faint rustle of aging paper echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers. His eyes found the first line. His lips parted. He tried to speak. No sound came out. He swallowed hard. Tears blurred the words before he could finish reading them. When he finally gathered enough strength to speak aloud, his voice was barely more than a whisper. My dear Elvis. He stopped, closed his eyes, opened them again, then continued. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer alive. Across the ballroom, someone quietly began to cry. And in that exact moment, without anyone realizing it, the glamorous charity gala disappeared. The cameras disappeared. The applause disappeared. The fame disappeared. Only one question remained. Who had written those words? And what had Elvis Presley sacrificed to keep their secret buried for so many years? The answer was waiting inside the rest of the letter. But before anyone in that ballroom could learn the truth, Elvis closed his eyes once more, and the memories of a rain-soaked highway from long ago finally came rushing back. For several endless seconds, Elvis could no longer see the ballroom. The crystal chandeliers, the flashing cameras, the whispers, the accusations, everything slowly disappeared behind a curtain of memories. His trembling fingers still held the letter, but his mind had already traveled back almost 20 years. Back to a night he had spent every day trying to forget. It had been late autumn. The rain had begun just after sunset. Not a gentle rain. It was the kind that swallowed highways, blurred headlights into pale ghosts, and turned every mile of asphalt into polished black glass. Elvis had just finished a sold-out performance. Thousands of fans had lined the streets, hoping for one final glimpse of him. Children held homemade signs. Young women screamed his name. Police officers struggled to hold the crowds behind metal barricades. Inside the black Cadillac, however, the world felt strangely quiet. His manager sat beside him, flipping through tomorrow's schedule.
You've got another performance before noon.
Then 2 interviews,
A radio appearance.
and another charity dinner tomorrow evening.
Elvis smiled weakly. Do I ever sleep?
His manager laughed. When you're dead. Neither of them realized how painfully those words would echo only minutes later. Rain pounded against the windshield. The wipers fought desperately to clear the glass. The driver slowed. Visibility was almost gone. Lightning suddenly split the sky. For a fraction of a second, the entire highway turned white. And that was when Elvis saw it. A car, upside down, halfway inside a ditch, smoke rising into the storm, its headlights still burning, its wheels slowly spinning. "Stop the car!" The driver hesitated. "Sir, it could be dangerous." "I said stop!" The Cadillac screeched across the soaked pavement before coming to a violent halt. His manager grabbed Elvis by the arm.
You can't go out there. It could explode. There are people inside. We need the police. They won't get here in time. Without another word, Elvis threw open the door. Freezing rain slammed into him like icy needles. Within seconds, his white jacket was completely soaked. Mud splashed across his boots as he sprinted toward the wreckage. The smell reached him first. Gasoline, burning rubber, smoke, broken metal. A woman's weak voice drifted through the storm. "Help!" It was barely louder than the rain. Elvis dropped to his knees beside the crushed vehicle. The windshield had shattered. Blood mixed with rainwater, flowing slowly down the twisted steel. Inside, a young woman struggled to breathe. Her forehead was badly injured. One arm was trapped beneath the collapsed dashboard. Behind her, a little girl curled into the corner, silent, too silent. Elvis's heart nearly stopped. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" No answer. The little girl's eyes remained closed. The woman forced herself to speak.
"My daughter.
Please.
My daughter first."
Elvis pulled on the rear door. It refused to move. Again. Nothing. Again. The metal groaned but held. He searched desperately around the roadside until he spotted a heavy tire iron lying near the ditch. Grabbing it with both hands, he swung with everything he had. Once. Twice. 3 times. Glass exploded across the rain-soaked ground. He reached inside, ignoring the sharp pieces cutting into his hands. His palms immediately began to bleed. None of it mattered. He gently lifted the unconscious child free from the wreckage. She was frighteningly light. Her tiny heartbeat, almost impossible to feel. He removed his soaked jacket and wrapped it around her small body. "Stay with me. You hear me? Stay with me." The girl never opened her eyes. Behind him, the woman cried out in pain. Elvis rushed back. The steering column had crushed part of her leg. She couldn't move. Smoke drifted thicker from beneath the hood. Somewhere inside the engine, something hissed. His manager finally reached the accident scene, completely drenched. "Elvis!" We have to leave. The car's leaking fuel. It could explode. Elvis looked at him only once. If your daughter was trapped in there, would you leave? The manager couldn't answer. Together they pulled. The twisted metal refused to release her. Again. Nothing. Again. Still trapped. The woman grabbed Elvis's wrist with surprising strength. Listen. If something happens. No. Don't talk like that. Please. She smiled despite the unbearable pain. Not for herself. For her daughter. Promise me. You'll save her. I promise. No matter what happens. I promise. Her trembling fingers slowly slipped into her coat pocket. She pulled out a tiny silver necklace. Inside the pendant, a faded photograph. One side showed the smiling little girl. The other side was empty. I wanted to put my picture there too. She coughed violently. Blood stained her lips. But I never had the chance. Elvis gently closed the pendant. You'll give it to her yourself. The woman looked into his eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she quietly whispered something that Elvis would remember for the rest of his life. If I don't survive, don't let her remember this night with fear. Let her remember that someone stopped. Those 4 words pierced deeper than any scream. Someone stopped. Not a superstar, not a legend, just someone. Far away, sirens finally echoed through the storm. Police, firefighters, ambulances. Too far. Too late. The smoke suddenly thickened. A firefighter running toward the wreck shouted at the top of his lungs. Everyone back! Move away from the vehicle! Elvis ignored him. He and 2 firefighters pulled together one final time. With a deafening scream of twisted steel, the dashboard shifted just enough. The woman cried out. They managed to pull her free only seconds before flames burst beneath the engine. The explosion wasn't massive, but it was enough. Heat blasted across the highway. Pieces of burning debris scattered through the rain. One firefighter shoved Elvis backward to protect him. He fell hard onto the wet pavement, still holding the little girl tightly against his chest. She finally moved, just slightly. A tiny cough escaped her lips. Then, very slowly, her eyes opened, wide, terrified, confused. She looked directly at Elvis. Mommy? His heart broke. He couldn't answer. Instead, he gently brushed the wet hair away from her face. You're safe. You hear me? You're safe now. She reached out with one tiny hand, not toward the ambulance, not toward the firefighters, toward Elvis. She wrapped her fingers around his. She refused to let go. The paramedics quickly surrounded them. They placed the girl onto a stretcher. Another team rushed to the injured mother. As they loaded her into the ambulance, she searched desperately through the crowd until she found Elvis standing in the rain. Their eyes met one final time. She smiled. A weak, grateful, almost peaceful smile. Then the ambulance doors closed. The flashing red lights disappeared into the darkness. The rain continued falling. For a long time, Elvis remained standing alone beside the destroyed highway. His manager quietly approached. "The concert. It's already started." Elvis never looked away from the road. "I don't care." Thousands of fans waited inside the arena that night. Some grew impatient. Some demanded refunds. Newspapers the following morning criticized Elvis for arriving almost an hour late. Columnists accused him of being irresponsible. Radio hosts mocked him. No one knew the reason, because Elvis never told anyone, not even once. 3 days later, while preparing for another performance,
A nurse quietly entered his dressing room carrying a small white envelope. "There is a woman at St. Mary's Hospital asking for you. She says she doesn't have much time left." Elvis slowly stood. His heart sank. Without changing out of his stage clothes, he walked out. He canceled the rehearsal, ignored his manager's protests, and drove straight toward the hospital. He had no idea that the promise waiting inside that hospital room would become the greatest secret of his entire life. And nearly 20 years later, that same promise was about to decide whether the entire world would remember him as a liar or as the man who quietly saved 2 strangers and never asked for a single word of credit. Memory faded as quickly as it had returned. Elvis slowly opened his eyes. He was no longer standing beside a rain-soaked highway. He was back beneath the dazzling crystal chandeliers of the Las Vegas Ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of silent faces, waiting for him to finish reading the letter. His hands still trembled. The paper felt impossibly heavy, not because of its weight, but because every sentence carried a promise he had protected for almost 20 years. He swallowed hard before continuing. "My dear Elvis, if you are reading this, then I am no longer alive. By the time these words reach you, my little girl will have grown without remembering my voice. That thought hurts more than death itself. But there is something that gives me peace. The night everyone else kept driving, you stopped. When everyone else saw danger, you saw people. You did not ask who we were. You did not ask whether anyone was watching. You simply came. You held my daughter as though she were your own. You stayed beside me when you could have walked away. You gave us hope during the darkest hour of our lives. That is why I am asking one final favor." Elvis paused. His voice cracked. Across the ballroom, several women quietly wiped tears from their cheeks. Even the photographers had lowered their cameras. The room no longer felt like a gala. It felt like a church. He continued reading. "Please, do not tell the newspapers what happened. Do not allow anyone to call you a hero because of me. Heroes who save lives for applause stop being heroes. Promise me that my daughter will grow up believing kindness still exists in this world. Not because famous people spoke about it, but because they quietly lived it. If one day she discovers the truth, let it be because life itself brings her back to you, not because you searched for recognition. Promise me." Elvis closed his eyes. He remembered the hospital room as clearly as if it had happened that morning. The pale walls, the smell of medicine, the soft rhythm of the heart monitor. The little girl asleep in the chair beside the bed, still holding the silver pendant in her tiny hand. Her mother had been painfully weak. Every breath demanded enormous strength. She looked at Elvis and whispered, "Can you promise me?" He had taken her trembling hand. "A promise,"
No interviews. I promise. No newspapers. I promise. No photographs. I promise. No speeches. I promise. She smiled. It was the peaceful smile of someone who finally knew her child would never be alone. Moments later, her heartbeat slowed, then stopped. The room became silent. Elvis stood there for a long time, unable to move. He quietly kissed the back of her hand. Then he walked to the sleeping little girl. He gently placed the silver pendant around her neck. Without waking her, he whispered, "Your mother loved you more than words could ever say." He left the hospital before sunrise. No reporters ever knew he had been there. No headlines were written. No cameras captured the moment. Only one man witnessed everything. The woman's elderly father. The same old man who now stood only a few feet away from Elvis in the ballroom. The audience looked from Elvis to the old man, finally beginning to understand. The old man slowly stepped forward. His voice was calm. "I searched for him for many years." He looked at the audience. "Not because I wanted revenge." He turned toward Elvis. "But because I wanted to keep my daughter's final promise." People frowned in confusion. He smiled sadly. "My daughter asked him never to tell the world. He kept that promise. I promised my daughter something as well." He reached into his coat one final time. The room held its breath. This time, he removed a small leather notebook. Its pages were worn from decades of careful handling. Inside were hospital records, police reports, letters, receipts, photographs. Every piece of evidence proving what had happened that stormy night. I waited until everyone connected to that promise was gone. My daughter, my wife, the doctors, the officers. I waited because I would never betray my daughter's wish while she was alive. He slowly closed the notebook. But promises do not last forever. Truth does. He turned toward the audience. For almost 20 years, the world admired Elvis Presley for his voice, but almost no one knew the reason I admired him. He pointed gently toward Elvis. I never came here to expose a lie. I came here to expose the truth. Silence. Not the uncomfortable silence from earlier. A different silence. The kind born from shame. Journalists looked down at the notebooks they had filled with accusations. One by one, they quietly closed them.
A famous television presenter stood up. His eyes were red. "I owe you an apology." Another reporter slowly removed the headline he had already written. Across the ballroom, a woman whispered to her husband, "We judged him before we knew anything." Her husband lowered his head. So did I. The old man walked closer to Elvis. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then the old man reached into his pocket and removed the faded photograph that had started everything. He handed it back to Elvis. "I kept this safe all these years. I think it belongs with you now." Elvis accepted it with shaking hands. He stared at the little girl's smiling face. So, she lived. The old man's eyes sparkled. She did. A soft murmur spread through the ballroom. She survived.
She became a pediatric nurse. She spent her life caring for frightened children. The old man smiled through tears.
She always told people she chose that path because, when she was little, a stranger made her believe good people still existed. Elvis could no longer hold back his tears. He covered his face. For years he had wondered whether the little girl had found happiness. Now he finally had his answer. The old man gently placed a hand on Elvis's shoulder. "There is one more thing." Elvis looked up. "My granddaughter wanted to be here tonight." A young woman slowly stood from the very back of the ballroom. She had been sitting quietly all evening. No one had noticed her. Around her neck hung a familiar silver pendant, the same one Elvis had fastened around the neck of a frightened little girl almost 2 decades earlier. She walked toward the stage with tears streaming down her face. When she finally reached him, she smiled. "I don't remember that night. I was too young. But my grandfather told me everything." She touched the pendant. "My mother told me that the kindest man she ever met never asked anyone to remember his name." Her voice trembled. "So, tonight, I simply wanted to say, thank you." Without another word, she embraced him. The ballroom erupted into quiet sobs. Even seasoned reporters openly cried. Musicians wiped away tears. Waiters stood frozen. No one cared about status. No one cared about fame. For a few unforgettable moments, every person in that room remembered what kindness looked like. The old man stepped toward the grand piano. He gently rested his hand on its polished surface. "My daughter told me something before she died." He looked at Elvis. "She said, if he ever sits at a piano again after all these years, tell him not to play for the world. Tell him to play for the little girl he carried through the rain." Elvis slowly sat down. He placed the faded photograph on top of the piano, beside the unopened envelope that had finally fulfilled its purpose. His fingers hovered over the keys. No orchestra joined him. No spotlight changed. No announcer spoke. The first note floated into the silent ballroom like a whispered prayer. It was not one of his famous songs. No one had ever heard it before. He had written it alone in a hotel room only weeks after the accident. He had never performed it. Not once. Every note carried gratitude. Every melody carried grief. Every pause carried a memory. As the music filled the room, people closed their eyes. Some remembered loved ones they had lost. Some remembered strangers who had once helped them. Others silently wished they had chosen kindness more often. When the final chord slowly faded into silence, no one moved, no one clapped, no one even breathed. Then, the young nurse who had once been the little girl stepped forward. She began to applaud. One pair of hands, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom rose to its feet. The applause thundered through the hall like rolling waves. But this time, it was not for Elvis Presley, the superstar. It was not for the records he had sold. It was not for the fame he had earned. It was for the man who had stopped on a lonely highway while everyone else kept driving. The old man leaned close enough for only Elvis to hear. "The greatest songs are forgotten. The brightest spotlights eventually fade. But one act of kindness can echo through generations." Elvis looked across the sea of standing people.
He smiled through tears. For the first time that evening, his heart felt lighter. Not because the world finally knew his secret, but because the promise had completed its journey. As the lights slowly dimmed, the old photograph remained on top of the piano. A young man from the television crew quietly walked over after the audience had left. He picked up the photograph and looked at it for a long moment.
Then he whispered words that would stay with him for the rest of his life.
History remembers legends, but heaven remembers those who quietly stopped.
Years later, people would still talk about the charity gala in Las Vegas. Many would remember the standing ovation. Others would remember the mysterious photograph. Some would remember the letter. But everyone who had been there remembered one lesson above everything else. The loudest applause in a person's life is never earned under bright lights. It is earned in the moments when no one is watching. And on that unforgettable night, Elvis Presley was remembered not only as the king of rock and roll, but as the man who proved that the greatest legacy is not fame. It is compassion.